Testing, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check. Check, 1, 2. Can you hear me? Check. I can't hear myself. Oh, thank you. Hey, how you doing? Awesome. Test. Am I live? Can you hear me? Check. Can you hear me out there? Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 115th season of the Empire Club of Canada, and welcome to the Spoke Club. My name is Kent Emerson. I'm the president of the Empire Club and your host for today's evening. I'd like to begin this evening by thanking our sponsor. The event sponsor tonight is H&K, and I want to thank Peter and Omar and all the folks at H&K. Thank you. Our media partner is National Post, and our event sponsor for webcasting today's event is mediaevents.ca. Without sponsors like these great companies, the Empire Club events would not be possible. So thanks for so many of you. And now it's my pleasure to do a door prize for a bottle of Raposa Bozen sponsored by Cesare Fine Wines of Verona and a one-year membership to the Empire Club of Canada. So here we got Sean Tepper, Office of the President of York University. Thanks, Shauna. Yeah. I'd also like to acknowledge my special guest for this evening, a new councillor, Jennifer McKelvey, councillor designated for Ward 25, Scarborough Rouge Park. Welcome, Jennifer. Where's Jennifer? Oh, she's at the back. On July 26, 2018, one day before candidate nominations were scheduled to close, during an ongoing election, Torontonians woke up to an announcement that Premier Ford had decided to cut Toronto City Councillor from 47 seats to 25. This decision was made with three basic points of view. Number one, those that disagreed strongly, either because it occurred during an election, because the proposed use of the notwithstanding clause, or because they disagree with reducing the size of council. The second group of people agreed strongly because they believed that the council fundamentally didn't work as it was, and that they hoped the changes would lead to more functionality. And the third group of people didn't disagree with the result. They wanted council reduced, but they didn't like the way it happened. So this led to a very interesting election process for all of us. The two mayoral candidates clearly fell into bucket number one. Mayor Tory at a news conference on July 27th stated, it was a very long quote, but it basically says, "You don't change the rules in the middle of the game." Jennifer Keesmaat stated, "Doug Ford has no business suspending the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to settle old political grudges and no democratic mandate to reduce the size of council." And he didn't campaign on it. So what is universally agreed upon is the decision fundamentally altered the municipal election and municipal landscape in Toronto. The tectonic plates of municipal candidacy shifted fault lines in the electoral earthquake. It forced some candidates to make new decisions about which race they would participate in, and prompting other candidates to withdraw from the race altogether. And what also is agreed upon is that we have a great panel here tonight who will talk about this issue and more, and how it affected the tone and tenor of the race. So what we're going to, tonight we have panelists Vic Gupta and Lindsay Maskel, moderated by Karman Wong, to give us the lowdown on all this. But first we have a special presentation by Nick Kouvalis, who is a Canadian pollster, political consultant and strategist. He is principal strategist of campaign research, a firm which he co-founded in 2008 with Richard Ciano, a former executive of the Conservative Party of Canada. Kouvalis has worked for clients at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government. He ran Mayor Ford's 2010 successful campaign, and he's been involved extensively with the Tory campaign. Welcome, Nick Kouvalis, and thank you very much.
Is the mic working? Test? Yeah? I'll just put this in my pocket. I'm good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I want to thank the Empire Club for pulling this together and H&K for sponsoring it. A lot of familiar faces in the room. Some of the folks here I worked on campaigns with 15 years ago, and some I recently met. Congratulations, Councillor-elect McKelvey. I was very happy to see you win, especially such a tight race. You really worked hard, and congratulations. I have about 15 minutes to go through about 15 slides, and if you could hold your questions for the end, that would be great. At the end, if you have questions about the research, I'll be happy to answer them. Vic was co-chair of the John Tory campaign. Lindsay was campaign manager. I know they say deputy, but I think you were running the campaign over there. They're on the panel, and I really want to try to leave some of the strategy and all the tactics to them to talk about. I'll just take you through the numbers from the John Tory perspective, okay? Oop. We got to go to the front. Okay. So we wanted to win by a large margin. We didn't just want to beat Jennifer Keesmaat or at the time even Blaine Lastman. We wanted to win by a big margin. And the bar for that was David Miller, who won in his re-election, a popular mayor who won in his re-election campaign against Jane Pitfield. He won 57 to 32 in 2006. And so we wanted to beat that number. And our goal was 60 to 30. We wanted to elect the best council possible that would support John Tory in implementing his mandate. And so that's just code for we didn't want as many lefties as we normally have. John Tory didn't want to endorse candidates, and if you think about it a bit, once you endorse one, then there's 5 others that say, well, what about me? I've been your friend for so long. So we wanted to endorse as few candidates as possible, but we did make some strategic decisions about endorsing certain candidates and getting involved in other candidate races so we could get that council that we wanted or we hoped for. And most importantly, we wanted to win very, very big in all the ridings that Premier Ford and the PC party won in Toronto. So they won 11 ridings, and they won with 38 to 52% of the vote. So we wanted to win by 2/3 of the vote in all those ridings, because that's the only language Doug Ford really understands at the end of the day. So I'll show you. So this is all the polling that we did throughout the campaign, and I'll just show you overall what it looked like. The first black line, the up and down line, is when Jennifer Keesmaat got in the race. And we were polling her before that, though we had a pretty good idea that she might get in the race. And then you see the second black line up and down where she went to 28, and it's better represented here. So after about a month in the race, she was moving up. Her numbers were moving up. Tory wasn't really moving down too much, but I've just extended some lines, hypothetical lines, of what we thought was possible. Well, some people thought was possible could happen. I never thought this what could happen, but some people did. And so she did well in the first month, and we'll talk about why I think she did well in the first month, and then what happened after. So this is a voter gap analysis where we ask people who they're going to vote for, and they tell us, and then we ask them after they tell us who they're going to vote for if they would consider the other 2 candidates that are listed here. So you see on August the 27th, the dark blue. Let's just look at the bar on the left. It's John Tory's voter gap analysis bar. I'll just explain what it all means. So the dark blue, 42%, are people who said they're going to vote for John Tory. And when we ask them, would you consider voting for Jennifer Keesmaat, they say no. Would you consider voting for Faith Goldie? And they say no. The light blue, the 9% you'll see, is people who are saying they're going to vote for John Tory, but they are going to consider at least one other candidate. The green, the first green bar, the 9% there, are people who are saying they're undecided about who they're going to vote for, but they are considering John Tory exclusively. And then the 4% are people who are voting for another candidate, saying they're voting for another candidate, but they are still considering John Tory. And the 35% are people who would not consider voting for John Tory at all. So the same goes for Jennifer Keesmaat and Faith Goldie. So you see on August the 27th, Jennifer Keesmaat's vote ceiling, right, and everything up to the red adds up to 34. So in the slide previous, we see her rising to 28, but we also see that we think her ceiling is at 34. So I'm not too concerned, but we want to check it out again. And obviously Faith Goldie, she's got 2% of the vote there, but up to 8%. And yes, we were looking, and some people would say we shouldn't be because she's a racist, but we're scientists. Our job is to look at all the candidates and what they can possibly do and not do. So you see, after August the 27th, we went to September 6th polling. Jennifer Keesmaat's numbers started to go down a bit. And then looking at the voter gap analysis, we see that her ceiling is at 32 now, 34. It's the same thing. It doesn't really, there's no statistical difference. So I've put a square or a line around this rectangle that signifies the first month of the campaign for Jennifer Keesmaat and her going up. And I've made a note here. So Jennifer Keesmaat was talking about bold leadership. She did her affordable housing plan, and she was already seen as strong on transit, building public transit. And when she was talking about those things, her numbers were going up. Now, mind you, you see the line that's going down, all other candidates. She was taking most of her support from the people who were never going to vote for John Tory or didn't want to vote for John Tory. They were going to her. They liked what she was saying. John Tory welcomes Jennifer Keesmaat into the race and recognizes her as a serious candidate and accomplished professional. That's where we were at around the end of August. Then this period is when Jennifer Keesmaat went down from her high of 28 back to the low 20s. And Tory kind of moved up back into the close to the 70 range. And this is the same time when Jennifer Keesmaat launched it was like her official campaign launch right at the end of August. And her strategy kind of changed a bit, or at least it came across that way. And certainly the media were they weren't really looking for the policy and the nuggets in the policy. They were more looking for the barbs and the attacks from both sides. And they wanted to write stories about who said what about who and who's attacking who. And so this is where Jennifer Keesmaat said John Tory's a bad mayor and she should know because she worked for him, and that he's weak and that he's a ditherer and on and on and on. And that really got the headlines and the stories going about that. And we think that taking her away from her focus of talking about her strength, where her strength areas were, led to her kind of collapsing a bit and us picking back up a bit. I can tell you, and Vic will probably talk about this, when we saw her go from 16 to 19 to 22 to 28, we started thinking, okay, right? Like we've got to figure out how to frame her in a negative way without being totally accused of going negative on her. So she kind of gave us the opportunity. When she went that negative on John Tory, it kind of gave us the opportunity. So we had a lot of big brains, we had a lot of money, we had a lot of muscle, we just put it to use. And we brought her favorables down from plus 30 on July 27th or July 30th to plus 5 by mid-September, her net favorable rating. This last period here, there was little chance that we thought she could get over 30. And remember, our initial goal was 60 to 30 at a minimum, and the mayor really wanted to have a big mandate. Vic and I personally, we really didn't care if he won with 55 or 65. We wanted the council, but he's the boss. And so we were looking at this and we're trying to determine, because every time you go and you help a candidate in a local race, you're burning some of your capital. You're upsetting some of your supporters who was supporting the other person, and you're losing a little bit of votes. So in this period here, we were sure she wasn't going to get over 30. We felt like because our objective was to stand in the middle of the political spectrum and not let her crowd in, and keep her as far to the left as we could. And we think that we accomplished that. And then the media is really starting to focus on the council races, because as Ken said, we went from 44 that was supposed to be 47 down to 25, and there were some high-profile races and incumbents going against each other. The media really wanted to go there too. So as you see in the last month of the campaign, it's pretty much flatline, right? Which got us at Campaign Research, the team at Campaign Research, kind of shaking our heads a little bit. Is this right? Is our sample good? Should we change the sample? Should we change the companies we use for sample? And we were doing all these things, and throughout these periods, we were changing our sample and changing the way we ask questions and getting different kinds of sample and doing different methodologies, telephone, online, and we kept coming back to the same numbers. Which, by the way, it's great when the pollster tells the candidate you're going to win 64 to 24, and you just say it in writing, and then it happens exactly like, it's nice, right? So, it doesn't always work like that, trust me, right? So it's nice though, because that's what John Tory will remember for a long, long time. So, okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about a poll we did at the beginning of August that helped us to determine the frame. What are the issues that we want to talk about? What are the issues, John Tory, and what are the issues we don't want to talk about? What do we think the research tells us that Jennifer Keesmaat wants to talk about and should talk about, and what she doesn't want to talk about, okay? So I'll just show you a couple things. So overall, right at the front, we asked people to tell us, open-ended question, what's most important to them. And every time we did a study, we basically got these results. So the dark blue line signifies their first issue that's most important to them. If they could tell the mayor and council to focus on something, what would it be? And then the lighter blue is the issue that they mentioned on their second or third choice. Some people picked 2 choices, some people were allowed to pick 3, they were allowed to pick up to 3. So crime and safety, top of mind, right, with the highest number of homicides in Toronto this year. That was top of mind. Affordable housing, city spending, public transit, traffic congestion, and high taxes. Those were all the top tier. And they came in this order pretty much every time. Near the end of the campaign, Crime and safety moved to number 2, and affordable housing moved to number 1, right in the last few days. So that was what they told us, right? Now, I'm going to show you a set of personal attributes, and then after this, I'm going to show you a set of policy planks. We ask people to rate these set of personal attributes they're looking for in a mayor that they might vote for. We ask them to rate these from extremely important all the way to not important. This is a 5-point scale. I'll just mention that, so I'm going to come back to that. So extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not important, and don't know. And so at the top, this is overt, right? This is what people tell us, and you got to remember, some people don't always tell us the truth. They are either maliciously not telling us the truth, or subconsciously they think they're telling us the truth, but they're not exactly telling us the whole truth. So overtly, this is what people tell us are most important from top to bottom. And the thing on the bottom there, consensus builder, though it's on the bottom, it doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means relative to all of the others, it's of less importance to the ones at the top, okay? So this is overt. On this graph, we have the x-axis and we have the y-axis, okay? So from top to bottom, from the top of the page to the bottom, it's exactly the same as this. But from left to right, this is a driver's analysis of what's driving the positive ratings of the candidates. So at the end of the survey, we ask people, it doesn't matter who you're going to vote for, overall, how would you rate the candidates for mayor? Excellent, good, fair, poor, don't know. And then we take those results and we run some complicated correlation. Ellie runs it with his team. I don't understand it all, but it works. And we come up with attributes that are driving the ratings of the candidates, positive. So on the slide prior, at the top, honesty, integrity, trustworthiness rated as the most important. That's what they told us overtly, but covertly, the person that's portraying the right image for Toronto is the most important driver of positive ratings for candidates. So this was a bit worrisome, right? Because Jennifer Keesmaat, John Tory is no question who's got the better image for Toronto. No question, hands down. Anybody who knows anything knows that he's a 65-year-old man, right? Who inherited a lot of his money, got a lot of big jobs. She is someone who built a business from scratch. She's telegenic, she's smart, she's educated, right? She's held some very high level and accomplished positions. So on image, she would beat Tory. At least that's what we thought when we saw this. On policy planks, of note, I want to come back to this. So you see here, the third one from the bottom will stand up and fight Premier Doug Ford. So the very important is the third least relative. But if you take extremely important and very important together, it's actually the lowest. And you see it here in the bottom left corner. Will stand up and fight Doug Ford. It is the lowest of importance relative to all of the attributes, and it is the least one. It's the one that drives positive ratings the least. Right? And this is where Jennifer Keesmaat kind of staked her ground. And this is why she couldn't get to 30, in my view. So here are the policy planks. Same thing. This is overt. This is what people tell us. And then this is covert. This is what's actually driving the positive ratings of a leader when we run that correlation. And so actually getting things done, being accountable to the citizens of Toronto, and building consensus at City Council, the federal and provincial governments are the three that are the furthest to the right. And I highlight the building because we made our whole campaign around. You heard John Tory keep talking constantly about how he can work with the other levels of government and bring money and so on and so forth. Okay, so most publicly released polls you see in election campaigns talk about the measurements that we just showed, but they never really get into the relative importance of these things, right? So I want to show you this here. So from top to bottom, these are now ranked. Which attributes are driving the leaders' ratings the most. So portrays the right image for Toronto, proving they were the furthest to the right. They weren't necessarily overtly the most important, but they were driving ratings the most. So that's how they're organized from top to bottom. And then what we do here is is we asked all of the respondents to these surveys to tell us how they rate the perceived performance of each person, John Tory and Jennifer Keesmaat, on each attribute. It's a very long study, okay? And then once we have all of those answers in absolute numbers, we spit out this analysis that is relative. And so what this really means is that on the first one, portrays a right image for Toronto, Jennifer Keesmaat scores a plus 0.76 and John Tory a minus 0.76. But because the number is so close to 0, it's not over 2, there's no highlight. And so it's likely she has a lead, but it's not very significant. On the next one, proven leadership abilities, it's over 2, which tells us that it's supposed to be green. We put a green box around it because the green coloring didn't show, but you see here number 1 at the bottom. We have a 95% confidence level that John Tory has a significant lead on Jennifer Keesmaat on proven leadership ability. And so John Tory's slogan, as soon as we saw this, we went with leadership that works. We saw that that was where he had the big advantage over her. Listens to constituents, it looks like he has an advantage, but we're not sure. It's a 1 to -1. But below that, ability to get things done, he was a +2. So we have a very strong confidence level. He's beating her on that. And then Jennifer Keesmaat does really, really well with devoted to making Toronto a better city and has a vision for the city. On the policy planks, John Tory has a significant lead on the top 3. And we're not quite sure that number 1, he's got a really big lead. We'll feel pretty good about that. But number 3 for sure. And that's why we spent so much time in the campaign talking about that. Right? Jennifer Keesmaat's strengths are more at the bottom. And again, just because they're at the bottom doesn't mean they're not important. It's just relatively speaking, that the ones at the top are driving the positive ratings of the leader a lot more than the ones at the bottom. Okay, back to this. Just to take a quick look here. All right, so at the beginning of the campaign, Jennifer focused on affordability and housing. You see the housing number, +5? So when you take all of the attributes and you take all of the policy planks in totality, the highest score she got, +5, and the lowest score for Tory, relatively speaking, was making affordable housing more accessible. And so the mayor in the campaign, and Vic will talk about this, was like, I want to talk about housing. We're like, no, we're not talking about housing, right? Well, I want to talk about housing. And we were like, no, we're not talking about housing. And thank God Warren was on the campaign, because Warren was a new voice who could say no to the mayor, so we wouldn't all get fired for saying no all the time. But that was her strength. That was her strength. That's where she should have stayed. And she would have definitely got over 30. She probably would have got up to that 34 and maybe beyond 34 if she stayed there. So this one's a little more complicated, but I'll explain it. So if you see at the top, it says August candidates, the numbers we just saw. Tory's absolute numbers versus Keesmaat's absolute numbers, the total being the average. And then in September, we did this again to see if there was any change in the campaigns about a month before the election. And you see Tory's numbers and absolute numbers, Keesmaat's numbers and absolute, and then the average total. And then the difference. So JK up, John Tory down. JK went up on one thing where John Tory went down, and that was transit, which is like number 5 or number 6. And we knew that was happening, and it was concerning to us. And John Tory went up on a few and stayed even with her on a few on his column. And so we just kept the campaign going, which allowed us now to focus our energy and our thinking around council candidates. And I'm just about done here. I'm just going to show 4. So this is the first one, Joe Mihevc versus Josh Matlow. I know a lot of people think that John Tory endorsed Joe Mihevc because he doesn't like Josh Matlow. That's not the main reason. The main reason for endorsing Joe Mihevc was to try to get the NDP in the city thinking that Joe Mihevc had a chance, because if they believed it, more of the NDP would go and help him. And the more the NDP was downtown Toronto helping Joe Mihevc, the less they were in our faces in all the other wards we were trying to win. That was the real reason we did that, and it worked. McKelvey, less than 200 votes. Bradford, less than 300 votes. Grimes won. A lot of NDP partisans left their areas to go help Mihevc because they thought he had a shot. And if he would have won, great. But he didn't, it doesn't matter. Etobicoke Lakeshore, this is what we were seeing here with Mark Grimes. We were seeing September 28th that Mark was doing just fine. Then on October the 11th, not so much. Then on October the 17th, full panic mode. I moved to Etobicoke for the last 9 days of the campaign. And then John Tory endorsed him, and we got a lot of people who were in Etobicoke who wanted to help John Tory, but also wanted to help Mark. We just cut them from the John Tory team and sent them all to Mark. And he won by a big margin, probably big enough that he thinks it's because of him, and it's not. And you guys should remind him that I said that. Okay, Beaches East York. So before the mayor endorsed, after the mayor endorsed, and the end, very fortunate to win here. I have a lot of high hopes for Bradford. Kelway was definitely a big NDP guy and would not have been very supportive of the mayor's agenda. So we're very, very happy with this result. York Centre, so October the 17th, this looks like Pasternak's going to win big, but we're talking to the Pasternak campaign, and it doesn't sound like it's going to win big. It sounds like it's going to lose big, really big, and so we got involved there to help. We probably didn't need to, but you never know. Things were really, really desperate there. And then that's it. So I want to thank the Empire Club again, and Kent, thank you. And I want to thank H&K and Peter's here, and I want to thank Karman for doing this.
Thank you.
Is that good? Enough?
That's all good, yeah, it's perfect.
All right.
So save your questions for Nick. Be available for questions at the end of the panel part. So we're just going to do a little bit of set adjustment here as well. And in the meantime, I'll do some introductions. So our first panelist goes back with John Tory to 2003, where he worked as the deputy campaign manager on his bid for mayor. He has also spent 2 years at City Hall in the late 90s working for then Councillor Rob Davis. He has also been a consultant. Most recently, he left the team at Sussex Strategy to take on his current role as principal secretary to Mayor Ford. To Mayor Tory. Give a warm welcome to Vic Gupta, co-chair of the John Tory campaign. Yeah. Lindsay Maskel is a strategist and consultant in the public affairs, crisis management, government relations, and advocacy field. She launched her consulting career in 2014 after more than a decade of senior political experience at Queen's Park, where she held positions including manager of regional desks in the Office of the Premier of Ontario and as Chief of Staff to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade and the Minister of Natural Resources, where she managed some of the most complex issues in governments. Lindsay Maskel. Yeah. And today's moderator has been with CP24 since January 2011 and has played a significant role in CP24's political coverage, from reporting at Toronto City Hall covering every municipal, provincial, and federal election. She got her start in broadcasting in the United States, where she's a reporter in Trenton, New Jersey, and Staten Island, New York. Wong returned to Toronto, where she held several senior roles in the Ontario government, including issues management for the Minister of Health and working for the Premier. So, Karman Wong, Lindsay Maskel, and Vic Gupta, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. You'll have a chance to ask questions at the very end of these guys and of Nick. I thought I'd start at the very beginning. So as a journalist covering this, we thought this is going to be boring. This is going to be real boring. Unlike last time, you had Olivia Chow, you had a Ford in the race, you had Tory. There's so far in the beginning been no competition. So we're all waiting, and I think we got overly excited by Blaine Lastman entering the race. So Vic, I'll go to you for that. Was he a real threat, given he was more right of center?
Well, I mean, we took, first of all, we like boring when you're the front runner and you're running a good government. So Blaine was a threat. I mean, he was a well-known commodity. We knew that there's a populist movement out there, and we knew that he could galvanize some support in the suburbs. the mayor luckily has support far and wide across the city. I think the results, which I'm sure we'll talk about in some great detail, bear that out. But he was a serious challenger. Anyone that has 80 to 85% name recognition across the city is a serious challenger, and so we took him very seriously. I mean, you'll note that when it was serious that he was going to run was probably our first real official campaign event where we went out on King Street and shook some hands and did a press avail, and so we took him seriously.
And I know Nick mentioned that you had done polling on Keesmaat before she had entered the race, and because you had a suspicion she might enter. Who else was on your radar at that point?
It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, the race for us really changed in September of 2017, right? I mean, the scenario that we were trying to avoid was Doug Ford on the right and Jennifer Keesmaat on the left, right? That was our sort of nightmare scenario. I mean, we would have won because we had the best team in politics, and that's what John Tory. That's the kind of people that come to John Tory. But I think that was our risk, and so when Doug ran for the leadership of the PC party and won, I think that was a game changer. We still believe that Jennifer may run in the end, so it wasn't a surprise to us that she did. But I think from that point forward, we, for us, it was really about establishing a mandate for the mayor, and not really. We weren't too without sounding arrogant. We weren't overly worried that there was one single candidate that could challenge us.
Okay, let's fast forward a little bit. Doug Ford says he's going to cut the size of Toronto City Council, much to the surprise of everyone. Didn't campaign on it. We didn't know about it. So the story goes, a bunch of NDP councillors, they're gathering together, trying to figure out who is the best person to kind of flank the left here, and they come up with Jennifer Keesmaat. Is that an accurate depiction of kind of how this all culminated into her running?
A little bit. So there definitely was a mix of Liberals and NDPers. The councillors were obviously very engaged about who they would like to have lead them, the progressive councillors. But a lot of maneuvering started sort of a lot before sort of that story of everyone in her living room. And in all fairness, I actually wasn't in her living room for that first meeting. Funny enough, I was actually destined to do any campaign against Mayor Tory because I was actually asked to do last month's campaign. And part of why I always thought there was a little bit of a setup was how much the Ford government wanted people like me as a liberal, sort of a centrist liberal, to build a coalition with some conservatives to fight John Tory, and thinking that I might be the kind of campaign manager that could do that. So I said no to that, obviously, and then all of that kind of mysteriously went away once it was announced, and those multiple days of there not being any reaction from the mayor's office about the reduction in council seats, which made me always think that that was the issue. But it was what propelled Jennifer Keesmaat into the race, and there was definitely a big NDP base to that, but then they realized they needed to build a broader team and then started to have conversations about what that would look like. It really was a day or two notice for her of people talking to her about it, what it would look like, who could build a campaign team, and obviously a disadvantage to start at that late notice in an election.
Okay, so let's talk about that, the cut to council. Vic, when that was announced, how did that change things?
Well, I will just say, I know this isn't a debate and we're not candidates ourselves, but since I've done that before, it's hard to not take on a comment that was made by Lindsay. I mean, I think that the mayor was very, very strong in his comments about Doug Ford. I was in the meeting with him, the private meeting, the private phone call that they had, where he used a lot of words that don't generally come out of John Tory's mouth about the nature in which that was being done. His comments publicly, he called it ramming down our throats. He was very clear. In fact, I had a very well-known member of the left-wing team at council whisper in my ear at that press avail, wow, I've never seen the guy so strong, this is great. So our view is that the left was always going to find a candidate. Mm-hmm. This was always a ruse to find a candidate. And the fact that, if John Tory didn't basically, call him out with, I don't even know what he could have done that would have prevented the left from finding a candidate. So, look, good for Jennifer. She's someone we believed always wanted to run, and so she was there to fight that fight for them. And I always thought it was odd that they wouldn't have a candidate. I think it galvanizes the support that you have in your own team on the left, on the progressive side. So it was odd that they wouldn't have had a candidate, I think. Mm-hmm. It frees up our guy and our team to focus on council races. So I think that was always their plan. How did it change the race? Well, it was a distraction. I mean, I think in the end of the day, it was the reason that Jennifer entered the race, and yet it was probably one of the reasons she couldn't galvanize her support and really get a message out. I mean, the race became about Doug Ford versus John Tory, and we were quite happy to have that fight or have that juxtaposition, because John Tory was the guy who was going to stand up for Toronto but not burn the bridges, whereas Jennifer Keesmaat was going to throw Molotov cocktails and then somehow do business with the government. And that was, that was one of our contrasts, significant contrasts, of course. And Jennifer gave us the ammunition with her comments about secession, which we took full advantage of.
Okay, so why don't we move a little bit deeper into the campaign? So Jennifer's first announcement, it was on affordable housing. And there's been some criticism that she played too much to downtown issues, really largely ignored the suburbs. And was that generally what you were trying to get at with the affordable housing being the first big policy announcement?
So no, it was, first of all, Jennifer was coming out of creative housing and having been a planner. People were looking to sort of what was she going to speak about first. And we knew it needed to be transit and housing as sort of top issues that would show her strength and some policy muscle and start to create a differentiator to Mayor Tory's plan. And so it wasn't so much that it was about the suburbs versus downtown, because in fact, this is an issue, like in the last 4 years, Toronto has now become the most expensive city to live in. So this isn't an issue that is just a downtown issue. It's the people who live in Etobicoke who want their children to be moving out of their basement and are worried about their grandchildren and the fact that the people can have a place to live and work in the city. And on top of that, of the people that then drive in, live further away from downtown and drive into downtown, and what that does in terms of, the amount of traffic and congestion on our roads. So we thought it made sense from an issue that actually concerned everybody in Toronto and wasn't seen as just a downtown issue.
And based on your polling then, Vic, you didn't think this issue mattered or was on the radar at all for your voters?
Well, look, we knew a couple things. We knew that based on what you just saw from Nick's presentation, that it was an issue, but it wasn't a vote driver. And more than that, our guy didn't do well on that, which frustrated him to no end. And so he wanted to keep talking about it. And we all have the scars to show from beating him back. That's why we had such a big team, is we each had to tag each other out to go back and talk to him. So no, we didn't want to talk about it. We know it's an important issue, but it was just not a vote driver for the voter pool that we knew we needed voting for our guy. I mean, I think, quite frankly, Jennifer should have talked about it every day. She should have had an announcement of a new aspect of her plan every day for the first 30 days, and she could have been in the mid-30s. I think that it was one of the issues where the gap between how the perception of John Tory versus Jennifer Keesmaat was the widest gap, the biggest delta. So hence we didn't want to talk much about it.
And did you guys do any polling to help the campaign along? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. Both in the, obviously, very first thing you do is baseline and see where our opportunities and strengths are that showed that Jennifer should be talking about transit and housing, and that we should be talking about the differentiators between ourselves and Mayor Tory. You can't run you have to have a reason to run a campaign against someone. You don't hire somebody like me to tear down a candidate. I've always done very positive campaigns, but you do have to point out what the differences are and why we thought we could do better and what Toronto would look like under a different mayor. So we really focused in on those issues. And to Nick's polling, I would say, that our first track started out we were starting out on a very positive track doing that. And in that gap window that he showed, in that first window after, sort of end of August, is when you actually do get into the 10 days of the notwithstanding clause issue, where we could not get air for the life of us. So we could be out talking about housing. We could be out doing anything, and we wouldn't be getting any attention because we were in really the middle of a constitutional crisis. And that's when our numbers were the lowest.
Okay. I know covering the race, I asked both your candidates about, it wasn't, I would call it negative campaigning. But you guys would call it, pointing out differences or whatnot. But you did attack each other on a personal level sometimes.
Well, so let me comment on that. I'm not sure what we did I would call attacking on a personal level. What we did is we pointed out very, very clear differences between John Tory's position and Jennifer's position. We also, look, Jennifer is has made a lot of public statements, right? A lot of statements on social media, and so over the years, quite frankly, it's running a campaign is different than running a Twitter account, right? You get to be held accountable for what you say, and so we held her to account on taxes. We held her account on her comments about how about secession and other comments like that, and we held her to account on transit, right, and on the relationship with other levels of government. So those are real substantive differences between our candidacy and hers. Jennifer, on the other hand, and it was surprising, I think, particularly to the mayor, I'd say chose a different tack, which I think rang hollow with the public. So it's not just that we drove contrast, and particularly on digital advertising, we did a lot of that. I think also her attacks her choice in how she responded was personal. She called him a ditherer. She said he had low energy. She said he's just not very good at his job. I don't know. I mean, ask 8 out of 10 Torontonians. I don't think they'd believe that. In fact, probably 10 out of 10 wouldn't say that he was not good at his job. I don't think they'd call him low energy. If he's got low energy, the rest of us should be dead.
So, Lindsay, was that a tactic that you thought worked?
Well, it was kind of, first of all, I'll just say, like, the social media was such an interesting place it's a different war ground, right? So on any day in the new world of Facebook advertising, you can go on and see what ads people have in the market, and it could be 58 negative ads about Jennifer Keesmaat with not one positive forward offering going out from the Tory campaign on digital. We had to sell our ideas. So we did need to spend a lot less time on anything that was negative. We saw it as just simply pointing out the things that needed to be better about Toronto, that we could have a better Toronto. In the last 4 years, we've become the most expensive city to live in Canada. We'd built no new transit, and there'd been 1,200 shootings and no gun ban. So we just wanted to point out the differences of why we thought we could have a better Toronto. And as the economic hub of Canada, we just should have a stronger mayor. And that was our opinion. And Jennifer, having worked with him directly, also had her opinions on how she was going to frame this.
I found Jennifer a little evasive when it came to, in the beginning of the campaign, answering questions about taxes and whether or not she'd raise taxes. But what was the thinking behind that?
Well, until you've actually laid out, obviously the differences of having to lay out a full platform and having it fully costed was that a lot of the time there were pieces that hadn't been laid out yet. And so then it was, where were we going to do that? So then eventually we did come out with our progressive tax about people who had done the absolute best in Toronto's housing market, that we would put a small increase on them. And then we were also pointing out where we would save things, like on the Gardner teardown, that would save $500 million. So it was more that it came together in pieces in the short term of the campaign. She didn't want to answer that question before she laid it out? It was that there were parts of it that were obviously going to be in a future announcement in the first couple of weeks of the campaign, while we were trying to cost out what we would call the mansion tax or the luxury housing tax. So that was a piece of it. But also, the truth is, with the part that, again, we will admit, I'm sure Jennifer Keesmaat's Twitter feed was a wonderful source of opposition research for you, and a great deal of work would have gone into that, of all of the things that she had tweeted about. And the truth is, we said over and over again that for most of Torontonians, that we would not be raising their taxes. It would only be on those few that had been the most fortunate in this housing market. But the truth is, it's an area that we weren't really well believed in because of the amount of, if you were going online, all you were seeing is that Jennifer Keesmaat was going to raise your taxes. So it was just something better for us to not actually be talking about.
So Vic, I'll be critical on something with the mayor. He sometimes appeared to be like he was running in second place sometimes. Like one thing that stood out to me is when he said he didn't want to debate Jennifer one-on-one. And I didn't feel, just maybe explain the thinking behind that, because I didn't feel like that was it didn't play well.
Good approach. Well, look, our guy was at 65, I mean, you saw the numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so we never thought his election was in doubt. And so the truth of the matter is, I mean, everybody knows the answer of why we did that. Mm-hmm. The reality is we did not want to create a head-to-head race, a head-to-head fight, a head-to-head opportunity for Jennifer to debate him. And quite frankly, the mayor did feel very, very strongly about, look, everybody knows John Tory. John Tory believes in one Toronto. He believes in all of the diversity of this city that makes it such a great city. And it just, for the life of him, he could not understand why all of our networks which pride diversity, I mean, look at the panel right here, would not want to have anybody that represents one of the diverse communities of the city. And so you had very credible candidates. I mean, now I think in hindsight, if you look at it, Saron, Sarah, Nia Singh, at least those three in particular were very, very strong candidates. But from a tactical standpoint, we were the front runner. We had we had a 3-to-1, if not sometimes greater than that margin. It was a high-risk strategy to put them head-to-head with a person who is very capable and a very strong debater. That was just high risk. So.
Okay, let's talk about some of the debates. I want to talk about some of the other candidates. And as a journalist, we struggled a bit with Faith Goldy, for example. And we didn't want to give her a lot of air, but I mean, she was doing things that warranted coverage, that disrupting debates, that sort of thing. We had to talk about it. How did you think you should approach candidates like Faith Goldy, Lindsay, and Vic?
Me first? Sure. Well, of course, we just thought it should have no air. We didn't want to have the positive messages of the Better Toronto we thought that could be built under Jennifer Keesmaat should be giving air to someone who, quite frankly, I can call her a Nazi, I believe. So we weren't comfortable with what we were trying to do to have her have any air. But at the same time, we're not the organizers of the debates. We're just hungry for debates. When you are the insurgent candidate, what you're hungry for is an opportunity to be heard. And we were there, whether it was they wanted 30 people on the stage or whether it was one-on-one, but of course we did want the one-on-ones because it was, I appreciate that the media for a while sort of humored this approach of saying, there's, once they realized that Saron was at 2%, and that there was a head-to-head race and that we should actually have a real debate and discussion, and exposed obviously the issues where other candidates were working together to promote other, to pump them up, to make, to suppress the debates. And, I sort of felt like we were all hungry for a bit of democracy and felt that we could do better and did everything to work with networks to try to have there be some format. But everybody, and again, when you're at 30%, everybody is bending to what the mayor was looking to do in terms of the debate issue.
I think our public position was our private position. I mean, let's call her for what she is. She's a white supremacist and a racist. She has no place, her ideas have no place in any forum that would open that up to her. And so the mayor's position was very, very clear. We were not going to debate her on and James Sears for that matter, and under any circumstances. We were not going to participate in any debate that wanted to have her present. That's just intolerant views that none of us believe in.
Lindsay, was there ever an actual path to victory here? Was there ever, or was this, as many people have suggested, an audition for something else?
So it was definitely not an audition. It's interesting because partway through the campaign was a Liberal convention. And I was quite surprised by the number of people that talked about, is this because she wants to run or is this for something else? And I said, and particularly was surprised by some of former male cabinet ministers who said, wasn't it a bit, impetuous to just sort of jump into the race like that? And I reminded them that they wouldn't have had any female cabinet minister colleagues if we hadn't gone out and asked them to run, that the path to getting your name on a ballot is very different for women than it often has been for a lot of male ministers. So it was a path to victory, and I'm sure this is what sort of probably made the mayor a bit nervous, was actually, if you look at the past election results, and this is some pretty simple math, but if we had actually, Liberals and NDP, considered both progressives had actually voted together, the path to victory on a win number is actually there. If Jennifer Keesmaat could have won based on the June election, there were more Liberal and NDP votes than there were Conservative votes in the city of Toronto. So that's a very simplistic look at a path to victory. I think that obviously entering the race that late does not allow you to have a great chance of success. You're definitely at an uphill battle every single day against a mayor that was strong and uncontested, and had really, I will admit, had done us a good service from four years ago, getting us off, the sort of late night comedy scene and jokes under the previous mayor when we needed an adult in the room. So people didn't really see a strong reason to vote against him, and we had a short runway room to do that. But I will say it was not an audition. She didn't have other plans, and that was her dream sort of job that she just auditioned for.
And she still currently has no other plans?
As far as I know, she still currently has no other political plans.
Okay, so let's talk about the results a bit. So she ended up pulling in fewer votes than Olivia Chow did back in 2014 when both Tory and Ford were on the ballot. Tory support was stronger in almost every ward. Is that basically what you found?
Absolutely. I mean, for us, I think as Nick articulated, I think actually we would have been 3 or 4 or 5 points higher had we not endorsed anybody. I think that cost us some support in certain wards. But yeah, I mean, look, our plan, we took Jennifer very, very seriously we took this whole race seriously, right? We had $1.5 million in the bank within 45 days of May 1st. We had a huge team. We had thousands of volunteers. We had basically every Liberal and Tory organizer you could imagine. But we won, and so the results bore that out. We had, with the exception of Lindsay, of course, who we couldn't bring over to our team, unfortunately. We won every ward in the city. 21 of 25 wards, we got over 60% of the vote. I don't know when the last time that's happened. I mean, that's a pretty resounding victory. We got a majority of the votes in every ward. And we delivered, I think, 15 friendly councillors, which was a very, very important objective as well. So, yeah, I think we hit all of our objectives in terms of the results, for sure.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about council and the makeup now. Where do you see that going? What do you see in terms of the composition and what the dynamic is like to get things through this time around?
That's, I think that's going to be the $1 million question. My job for the mayor was to drive his agenda through council, and I'm wondering what that's going to be like. I think in one hand, there's a sense that it'll be easier because there's less councillors and therefore there's less wrangling that one has to do. But that said, less councillors, more power in each councillor's hand, in a sense. And so, I think we're really looking forward to people like Jennifer and Brad to add some fresh ideas and their fresh faces there. But, a lot of that core, there's a core group of 9 or so strong NDP votes, I think, progressive votes that are there that we know are not going to vote with the mayor. And so we feel pretty good about things. I think we feel like we can get the agenda through, but time will tell. We'll see.
Yeah, and there were some issues, Lindsay, that Jennifer brought up during the campaign that the mayor seemed a little interested in maybe entertaining. Was that part of the mark that she left in this election?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
She had some ideas.
Yes.
That do you think they would carry over into this current administration, or is that the hope?
That is definitely the hope. I mean, it was so fun getting to run a campaign based on positive ideas and a vision of what Toronto could look like with not no risk, but because she's a young woman and her reputation and just getting to do such a positive campaign of those ideas. And I do think that when we look at the post-media polling that they did about the ideas and platforms put together in the campaign, that was when actually those ideas were supported by 79 and 81% of people that were polled. And so a lot of the ideas had a lot of support. And I think the mayor has an interesting challenge of that those ideas don't just go away. People have real concerns on transit and housing issues, and we're hoping, and especially because you would know that you'd have support of those progressive councillors with some of those ideas, there's no problem with borrowing a good idea. It's happy to support it. So we hope that will happen, and we really will hope that we see better support and teamwork amongst councillors. I agree. What had existed wasn't working. I don't think that interrupting it during the middle of an election. That should never have happened. But I'm hoping that we will see new ideas and that we will have, that this election will have put the mayor a little bit on his toes of that this isn't sort of just, an end of retirement job. We're the biggest city and most important economic hub of Canada. Like we have to do better. And I hope that some of those ideas will be adopted and Jennifer would be the first person to applaud them.
Okay, we've got some time for audience questions. So if anyone's got a question for these guys, microphone, center of the room, there.
All right, thank you. Kind of nervous here. Okay, so I got a question for Nick. Yeah, please, and both of you also. So considering John Tory's change of stance on gun laws, right, and their effect in Toronto over the last year and the rising violence, what decided for both campaigns to go with the issue of the legal gun holders and the gun ranges? And I'd like to start off with Lindsay.
Sorry, and I actually couldn't hear your question.
What?
Oh,
Why did you go there on the gun ban?
why did
Yeah.
we go with okay, so
Targeting legal gun.
So Jennifer's position always would have supported a gun ban. That would have been something you would have seen in her Twitter feed about 6 years ago. So that was something our candidate had always supported as a position. And the crime and safety in this city has actually become, and as you saw it in the polling, had actually become a pretty big issue in this election. I've lived in the city for 17 years, and only on turning 40 and in the last year have my parents called concerned about where I was in our city. I think when we saw a bit of a shift of where violence was taking place and when our crime rates went above New York City, it was a natural position for our candidate, but I actually think it's top of mind for a lot of Torontonians.
Yeah, the mayor's position on that was his position. It's hard to sort of say before he was a candidate or when he was a candidate, but it wasn't a campaign position. And that was his position as mayor. And there's been lots of comments, and I think Jennifer, quite frankly, fairly so, called him out on his change in position. And the change in position for the mayor, where at one time in 2014, he had said he didn't support a gun ban, and now he said he did, is actually, mayor has the benefit of data from the police, and some of that data showed that the source of guns has changed, and where guns were coming in from the U.S. a lot more in the past, and a gun ban for legal gun holders in Toronto or Canada wouldn't have done much. Now that's changing. Now there's a lot more guns being traded within Canada, and so he felt, and our team felt, that was the right position. It's a position he believes in now very passionately. I'll just add, I think, of interest, we haven't talked much, Karman, about the crime issue. It is, as Nick pointed out, it was polling as the number one issue for the majority of the campaign. And you can bet John Tory wanted to talk about it. And we knew that was, we made a tactical decision to not talk about it. Because we felt our plan was solid, but it's just, for an incumbent, it's a no-win situation to talk about those types of issues. And we actually had, on his request, cut some ads that will obviously never see the light of day on that issue.
But we do are glad that he now supports a gun ban.
Absolutely.
Look forward to seeing it.
We can all pressure the Prime Minister for it now. Nick, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. My name is Elena Mantiaris. A question, I would say, for Nick and Vic. Vic, I took your comment that you made that you had Liberal and Conservative strategists working on that campaign. I thought that it was really interesting because one of the things from a layperson's perspective is the polarization that I see around candidates. What I saw was Conservative and NDP. And in fact, I didn't see a strong Liberal presence through any candidates in most of the ridings. And I'm looking at Nick and I'm looking at Vic to understand a little bit about what you think that means for the tone and tenor of debate in a city. I'm a little concerned about things being cast in a polarized way in this city. But you said you had Liberals on that campaign.
We had a lot of Liberals. I should also add we had progressives as well. We had card-carrying New Democrats. We had people that would identify themselves as progressives. The message that John Tory gave me when he asked me to take on this role of putting the team together and being the co-chair with my colleague Vince Gasparo, who is a very, very well-known Liberal. Of course, Warren Kinsella was on the team, another well-known Liberal. We had more endorsements from sitting MPs, MPPs that were Liberals than we did Conservatives. We didn't look for endorsements from provincial Conservative MPPs, of course. So we had a lot of Liberals. I think the polarization that you speak about, maybe it's more partisanship. I mean, we had support from lots of communities that come together. We had support from the technology community, the innovation community. We had support from the film sector and the arts community, the creative and cultural industries, just to name two sort of distinct communities that do the government is very important to them, and who is their mayor is very important to them. But those are not partisan people who don't tend to get involved in campaigns. When people that aren't typically involved in campaigns get involved in campaigns, they see a different world. I mean, we're in the election winning business. That's what we do. And so we bring people on board who know how to do that.
I would take a stab at that too. So my experience in Toronto is that people who are conservatives are not really that conservative. Most other conservatives outside Toronto would say those conservatives are liberals. And to win in a city like Toronto, you need to have a coalition. Kathleen Wynne got 49% of the vote in the 2014 election in Toronto. Dalton McGuinty got 48% of the vote in the election that he won prior to that, I think 2011. The other thing that I've learned over the years is that when you surround your leader, your candidate, the campaign chairs with a diverse group of people, you have better ideas at the table. I can tell you that from where I stood, and no attack on Jennifer Keesmaat's campaign. They did the best they could at the last minute, and she did really, really well. And if she wants to be mayor of the city, I think she's probably like the #1 person to get that job. I have a lot of time and respect for her abilities. But around her campaign team at the beginning, at least from what I could tell, were like hardcore NDP partisan, lifelong NDP partisan. A couple of them who were like co-sponsored or had signed the LEAP manifesto. Right? No media was writing about that. They were writing about how much vodka I like to drink on the weekends or whatever, right? No media was writing about that. So the John Tory campaign really was a diverse group of old and young, center to right, men, women, and a whole bunch of different ethnocultural communities around the big table. And some people at that table were not afraid to say, well, I disagree with you. Or I agree with so-and-so's opinion, which is different than yours, Nick, or different than yours, Vic. And so that, I saw that in BC when we worked for Christy Clark, mostly liberals there and a few conservatives. But I saw that same type of thing. And if I can ever run more campaigns, and I don't want to, and I probably won't, but if I do, the best advice I would give is to bring more people, put them around the table from my diverse group. I think, Lindsay, I feel sorry for you over there. At least I felt sorry for you over there because I saw you. It felt to me like you were surrounded by radicals, right? And you made it. You made it, though. You made it. So.
Did you feel that way?
So actually, it's interesting. I didn't. I had just come out of a campaign in doing a Vaughan Baker's campaign in Etobicoke Centre, and so I have usually been fighting the Tories, not the NDPers. So I didn't have any background with them, and so it was interesting. I had obviously I do some work with Dawn, so I didn't know Brian Topp before, who was Alberta NDPer, so very different spectrum. I didn't have that experience. I enjoyed every day on the campaign. I am still very much a centrist liberal, and I think that this is an area where time is really at your advantage of getting those endorsements in early and securing those people, and going back to the people that supported the mayor in 2014 when we wanted anybody but Doug Ford, and again an election where his success really is when Doug Ford is a ballot question. So it's I didn't have that experience. It was quite interesting because I have done some coalition work before, but typically with conservatives, and it was just people were willing to take off their their red and orange hats and really get behind a progressive candidate that had great ideas. And it's an area in terms of where a lot of people who would have supported us otherwise had just been gotten to earlier. But it was definitely an interesting experience, and interesting to do a campaign insurgent in that way, of that you show up at the table and that's who you're going to work with, because that's the amount of time you have in terms of the runway room.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Evan. I have a two-part question. So first off, as we know in municipal politics, there's no official party structure. However, this election was interesting because we saw the rise of Progress Toronto. And my question would be to the panel, how do we feel like this emergence of Progress Toronto entered into the calculations throughout the actual campaign? Secondly, the second part to that is, do we feel that given the high numbers of Mr. Tory leading into July 27th, that there was, like maybe it seems a little bit cynical to say, but there was a push to get Ms. Keesmaat into the race so that it would act as a distraction in the council races? Because you alluded to the fact that they didn't want to get involved too heavily in the council races because that would reflect poorly on Mr. Tory. There you go, that's it.
You've been dying to talk about
Progress Toronto. Well, I mean, for all the fanfare and all the meetings they had and all the stuff they did, what did they accomplish? They didn't win one ward. They didn't win one. They didn't. Every single person that they went after to get elected, none of those people won, right? And you open the news or you read the newspaper, you turn on your phone, and oh my God, Progress Toronto, and there's just going to be so grand and so great, and they sucked, right? Like, would you hire any of those people to run your company? No, right? Because they can't win at anything. They tried. They had all the money, all the unions, they had everything, and they couldn't even win one ward. So,
So this may surprise you, but I'll actually agree a bit with Nick on this. So first of all, I don't know them.
There you go.
So I don't know any of them. I never met with any of them. We're professional organizers, and that isn't how I would have ever approached this, right? So if there's anybody here from them, I'd be happy to meet them, but this is not how I would have ever approached a progressive third-party campaign. And the only thing I'm really quite curious about is to see their third-party return, because I actually do agree with you. I wonder what they actually did. I didn't see much from them. I emailed them once about something, and it took 4 days to get a response back. So I don't think it was. I don't think they're effectively organized. But there's some interesting models of this that have worked in other campaigns.
I would just only add, Evan, first of all, we should all just give Evan a shout out. He was a candidate in this election for councillor in Parkdale High Park. And I am still one of these idealists that believes we need more good people, young people putting their name on ballots, and so good for you. I would just add that I said it earlier, I do believe that the left, the progressives, the NDP coalition on council was going to have a candidate. It's essentially because of your comment that it is a way to galvanize your support. So I think Jennifer wanted to run. I think she was a perfect victim in a way, because I don't think she ever had a shot. And I think, she was a bit of a pawn for that group on the left, including, the fellow who you ran against. So it was useful for them to use to galvanize their support and keep our team busy so that we couldn't be in a lot of those races. Now,
but I would just
thankfully,
say,
we did have a chance to do that.
Keesmaat may have the last laugh when Leighton or Cressy decide they want to put their name on the ballot in the next election, and she decides she wants to put her name on the ballot. And if there is no one else on the campaign on the ballot that's more to the right of Jennifer, well then guess what? Another chance to beat the left. I'll be working for Jennifer.
As the centrist in the race.
Yes.
Is there any more one last question, and then we're gonna. Pardon me? Okay, we're out. So great. Okay. So I want to thank the panelists, and I'm going to bring on a great political strategist and experienced communications person, Peter Dinolo from H&K Strategy. He's the senior advisor in strategic communications and public engagement. Peter Dinolo.
Right there.
There you are, sir.
Thanks, guys. What a great panel. I've been involved in politics for a long time. My very first job in politics and government was being Art Eggleton's communications director when he was mayor. So I have a strong feeling for the city, a strong sense. I co-chaired David Miller's first mayoral campaign, one of these come from behind things. So, I spent a lot of time in Ottawa, but my heart really is with the city. And you guys, I think what we saw today was, I've been involved in campaigns that have won big, campaigns that have lost big, okay? And you learn a lot, sometimes more from your losses and from your victories. It's great to hear both sides, to hear the passion these people have, the analysis, the insight, and clearly politics makes strange bedfellows, particularly municipally. And my bet is they'll all be working together in the same campaign someday soon. So I want to thank them. I also want to put in a word for our guys, H&K. We've got the best municipal team in the city, or in the province or country. So come and see us if you need any help or advice. In the meantime, thanks for a great evening. Really interesting and entertaining. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. One last thing. Next week, we have an event at TIFF Lightbox with November 21st, featuring Michael Katchen in conversation with Amber Canwar. Thanks, everybody.